During Aseret Shemei Tshuva, the 10 days of Tshuva between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we have many different minhagim. In fact, many minhagim began Chodesh Elul, whether it was the blowing of the shofar during Elul, adding L'David Hashem Ori, that we continue throughout Shmini Atzeres, and the minhag of blowing shofar we only do during Elul, not during Aseret Shemei Tshuva. We start Slichas for Sfardim in the beginning of Elul, and continue for Bnei Ashkenaz a minimum of 4 days before, perhaps sometimes like this year longer, depending when Rosh Hashanah falls out. And we have, and the Shulchan Aruch brings down a minhag, Sama Machmir, only to not have Pas Palter, that all year round we're lenient in terms of having kosher bread but made from a non-Jew, but there's a special Indian during Aseret Shemei Tshuva to have Pas Yisrael, as well as many other minhagim. So one of the interesting minhagim we have is the minhag of, which we begin on Rosh Hashanah night, is the minhag of dipping our challah in the honey, and as well on Rosh Hashanah dipping the apple in the honey. So we have a minhag of challah and apple in the honey, and that goes throughout the Yomim Noraim. And some Achronim say you should continue it up until Shmini Atzeres, even to Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah, as the Vilna Gaon writes in general, that those are all the Yom Tovim Sukkos, Hoshana Rabbah. These are all the extension of the Yom Noram, Simchas Torah as well. Why we're celebrating Simchas Torah? One of the aspects is the simcha of now that we did tshuva and we're tahar and we're lifnei Hashem Elokechem, and therefore now we could have the ikar simcha. The ikar simcha is to be in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sin causes a barrier between us, and when we don't have any barriers, we feel closer to our level of simcha. So there's a minhag of having honey. We know all year round we have a minhag of salt on the table. So there's a discussion among different minhagim. Do you continue with the salt as well on Rosh Hashanah, or is honey to the exclusion of salt? So some bring down that you do both. You continue the minhag of all year round of salt, as well as honey as well. And other Achronim write that no, that one should not put salt on the table, or not dip it into the challah during the Yom Noram, and perhaps to after Sukkot. So what is the basis for that minhag of not putting salt on? So the Achronim point out, based on some Rishonim, that what's the concept of general of putting salt on the table? So the Gemara tells us in Brachas, and the Rishonim explain that our shulchan is dom el mizbeach, that our table is similar as compared to the altar, and therefore just like called carbon, every carbon had salt on it, so too we should have salt on our meal, as and salt, salt could be magen for us, the salt could protect us. And that's what the Medrash writes, that when all the Jews are in the middle of washing between the Tilos Yadayim and Hamotzi, and we can't do anything, and so the Satan can be makatrig, so we have the salt, that look, the schus of the karbanos, the merit of the karbanos, it saves us. So Shimshon Raphael Hirsch explains, why do we have salt all year round? Because salt represents, it's a preservative, it's a natural preservative, and it preserves something which is still good. If you have a good piece before the freezer, you had a piece of chicken, meat, or anything else, so you put salt on it to preserve it. Of course, if the meat was spoiled already, then the salt would not help it. But if something is still good, salt is the preservative. So that's what we show all year round. We're showing we're preserving our tradition, our Masorah. However, honey represents something totally different. The Gemara tells us, and Chazal tell us, that honey has the ability to transform. That if one puts even a nevela. You could buy honey from a non-Jew. Maybe they put a nevela, non-kosher piece of meat inside. So we're not concerned, even if they did, do we say the honey overpowers and takes over the piece of meat? And similarly, Tosfos asks, what about the ragle of the bees? So we know bees, it's a whole separate discussion. How do we have honey at all? If bees are not a kosher animal, and hayotzi mina asur asur, something which comes from a prohibited substance is also asur. So that is a special pasuk, Eretz Zavas Chalav Udavash, that the Torah this praises Eretz Yisrael. One of them is a land flowing with milk and honey. Of course, that honey is talking about Davash Tamarim, date honey. Nevertheless, the Gemara says it's also referring to bee honey, so it's a difficult source, but L'maisa, that's what the Gemara says, and therefore that's why we eat it. So the question is, what about the ragle, the feet of the honey, the feet of the bees? The bees aren't kosher. You get stuck in the honey and you can't get them out. So how can we eat honey? So Tosfos answers that no, it's nosin tam with gab. It has the din of like a bone, and it's like gid hanasha. There's a bone, so we say that gives out no taste, and therefore it's a lousy taste. It's a nosin tam with gab, and therefore it's not a problem. That's what Tosfos says. However, the Rosh Kol Shabbeinu Yonah that says something different. No, the reason why we're not worried about the nevela or the ragle, the feet of the bees, is because the honey overtakes them, and therefore it's like batul. Like we have a halacha batul aro, batul b'shishim. It totally becomes nullified and overpowered by the honey, and that's why, and that's why we use honey, and not only Rosh Hashanah, but through the Yom and the Ram to show we like honey. That of course we should have a sweet and happy New Year, but in addition to that, we should have the ability to change. We're not going to show, we're the same as last year. The salt represents to preserve what you have, but honey represents change. And on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Yom and the Ram, we want to show HaKadosh Baruch Hu how much we changed, and therefore we go ahead and we have the honey, and that's what. Where the Chavetz Chaim points out that the Chazal compare honey to Torah, the Mitzukim Kedvash, and therefore, just like honey has the power to transform, so too Torah has the power to transform. And that's what Rabbi Yosef points out in the Sefer, that even more than that, because some Achronim say that's only if it's a piece, if it's pieces of treif that fall in the honey, then honey can overpower it. But if you have a full piece, a berry, a full bug, so then honey doesn't overpower it. But Torah is even greater. That Torah gives us the ability to change, even if we totally have a barrier, even if we did terrible things throughout the year, but Shuv is always available. Like the Gemara tells us with Achir that even you could be like Achir, you never give up. Even though he thought the Basko said you can't do tshuva, but we have a tradition, no, you can always do tshuva. And that's pshat. The Rabbi Yosef writes that the Gemara tells us, Kol Talmid Chacham she'ein bo deya, every Talmid Chacham that doesn't have any common sense, that does, or as Mark Twain like to say, unfortunately, common sense ain't too common. So any Talmid Chacham or any individual doesn't have deya, the vela tova, a piece of carcass, a piece of treif meat is better than them. It shows that you don't know how to apply your knowledge, you don't do anything, you're staying the same, so therefore even the vela is better. But Rabbi Yosef says, no, what's the pshah? What is specific parallel to nevela? Because that's what he's referring to. Chazal tells when you put nevela into honey, it transforms the nevela into honey and it's kosher. So too, Talmid Chacham, a Talmid Chacham she'ein bo deya, that doesn't change, has no seicha, doesn't know how to apply the things he learns and stays the same. Nevela tov, because a piece of meat has the ability to change. A Talmid Chacham she'ein bo deya doesn't, and therefore is worse than a nevela. So that's the pshat. That's the minhag. We have many minhagim throughout the Aseret Shemei Tshuva, and one of them is the minig of honey, and besides having a happy and sweet New Year, it's ki ha-mitzvah hazos, the mitzvah of tshuva, as the Rabbi writes, ani acher, the ability to change, and hence the minig throughout the Yom Noram to dip our challah in honey, and some have a specific minig not to have salt, because salt represents preservative staying the same, and in Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, we want to show to HaKadosh Baruch Hu how much we have the ability to change and how much we will be changing. The Torah tells us that on the 10th of Tishrei, v'yidisam es nafsho seichem, we have a mitzvah as we know it to fast on Yom Kippur. And as well, the Gemara learns out, because the Torah says B'tisha b'chodesh b'erev, it says on the 9th day, but it's really the 10th day. The Gemara learns out that whoever eats on the 9th day, there's a mitzvah in our Torah according to many to eat on the 9th day, and whoever eats on the 9th day gets credit for fasting on Yom Kippur. So the one day a year we have a mitzvah to fast, biblically speaking, we have a mitzvah to eat. So that's perhaps a mitzvah in our Torah we have on Erev Yom Kippur, and perhaps we'll go into it another time. However, there's a minig we have on Erev Yom Kippur in the morning. It's usually done, and it's an old minig, which it's called kaparas. And the old minig was, and some still do it today, was you used to take a chicken over your head and basically say the different prayers, say the different phrases. You're basically saying you're transferring your sins onto the chicken, and then you slaughtered the chicken, and then the minig was to give it to an ani, give it to a poor person to give tzedakah. And this goes back already to the time of the Gaonim, and even though today it's an accepted minig to do kaparas, however, it was still a very controversial minig. Today we'll see most people do it with money, but it goes back, there's an old machokes, the Ramban, as well as the Chuvas HaRashba, were very against the custom of waving the chickens over your head. They felt it was in violation of Darkei Amori, following the practices of the idolaters. They felt it was Avodah Zarah, it was a form of idol worship, and therefore they forbade in their community anybody to do kaparas, maybe period, or at that point definitely with a chicken. And in fact, in Shulchan Aruch, the Machaber brings down that one should refrain from the practice of kaparas with the chicken, although he doesn't say it as strongly as the Ramban and the Rashba that it's Darkei Amori. And the Ramah quotes the Minig Ashkenaz that he didn't have a problem with it, or whether he had a problem with it or not, he said the minig is to perform it. So, what is the issue? Why isn't the Ramah concerned about Darkei Amori? Because we see he writes the Minig Ashkenaz what to do it. So, different approaches people take. Some of the Achronim point out that, and perhaps even in one of the earlier Rishonim, that the prohibition of Darkei Amori isn't some generic principle of not being involved in idol practices, but there are specific practices mentioned in the Tosefta, and therefore they claim that only the ones specifically mentioned in Tosefta are a problem, but the other ones are, and maybe it's not, generally shouldn't be done, all things being equal, but if they're not listed in the Tosefta, they don't fall under Darkei Amori. And that issue is a general issue, nothing independent of Darkei Amori, that when the Mishnah Tosefta listings, are they giving just the minimum amount, are they giving the maximum amount? And you have those issues come up in terms of more contemporary issues, like shaving on Chol Hamoed. In other words, because so even though, let's say, the logic applies today, that those who shave daily, you should shave on Chol Hamoed as well, but one there are many issues, but one of the issues of the opponents of that is that no, since the Mishnah, the Gemara in Moikatin lists the exceptions to the rule. One who gets out of jail, different types of examples, and doesn't list one who shaved. So therefore, if it's not mentioned in the Tosefta, in the Mishnah, then we don't have a right to make our own. So here's similar in the reverse case, where we only were saying it luku, and therefore that's why the Ramah wasn't concerned about it. Others point out that you're right, if you assume that the chicken, your sins are going on the chicken, maybe that's a bit of a darkei amori. But that's not the reason why, that's not purpose behind kaparas. The purpose behind kaparas is, like many things we do during Aseres Yemei Tshuva, it's to elicit thoughts of tshuva. In other words, there are many chumras, many minhagim we take on during Aseres Yemei Tshuva, i.e. not having pas palter, certain breads that are permitted all year round, some are accustomed not to eat. And as the Bali must point out, what are we doing things we're trying to fool God? We're doing things we're never going to do again? No. That by doing these things, those acts themselves were, the actions create the mood, and therefore by doing those things it has an impact on us. So that's the reason why. It's to elicit thoughts of tshuva, and therefore if it's to elicit thoughts of tshuva, it's not a problem of darkei amori. Or similar, some achronim bring down, it ties into the general machlokes we have in the Rishonim and the Achronim in general regarding chukas hagayim, in terms of what are the parameters of, well, obviously could I eat French fries because non-Jews have French fries? Could I eat hamburgers? Obviously, everyone says you could eat French fries, you could eat hamburgers. The question is, what are the parameters of what is considered chukas hagayim and what isn't? So there's a machlokas in the Rishonim and Achronim, which is a machlokas, the Vilna Gaon and the Ramah. The Ramah holds that if there's some practical benefit to what you're doing, so even if it's the non-Jewish practice, it's not a problem. Like the famous machlokas regarding whether kedak to wear their green outfits, their white outfits. Some say it's chukas hagayim, and others say no. There's a practical benefit that it's a level of chashivas that people recognize you're skilled in your field, and therefore there's a reason behind the practice. So this could tie into the general issue that since over here the practical purpose of kaparas is to elicit tshuva and to bring us to atonement, so therefore it's okay. That's the machlokas, the Gra, and the Gra in general holds that even with the practical element, again, that we'd have to check and see if that was the minhag Gra to be against it. There's nowhere I saw the Gra explicitly went against the practice, but that's what we'd have to check into. So even if you forget the darkei amori issue like the Ramah, but there are other issues that arise regarding the practice of kaparas with chickens, that is, that Rabbi Avaji Yosef brings down in Yechav Edas. He says that today that leads to another problem, that since there are so many people waiting online, and they bring the live chickens before they get slaughtered properly, so number one, there are long lines, and therefore the shochtim, the people slaughtering the shochtim, maybe aren't doing a good enough job because they're just knocking off so many. They can't, kind of like the problem of making your own. When people slaughter animals in the dark there, so you could be eating treif. So similar problem here. If you have so many people, you have to make sure that the shochtim have enough time and do it properly. And as well, other achronim as well suggest another issue is, Rav Zalman, Ephraim Zalman Margolius brings down as well that the issue of Sar Balei Chayim, that if you're going to keep them holding up in your hands and tying them up for a long time, so therefore it's a problem. So two problems. Number one, the problem of end up eating non-kosher or giving it to the aniyim, and secondly the biblical problem of Sar Balei Chayim, causing unnecessary pain. Therefore, based on this, Chacham Abad Yosef points out that maybe to reduce the pain, maybe you don't have to wait to Erev Yom Kippur. During Aseres Yemei Tshuva, you could start doing it so it's spread out So therefore it alleviates the issue of Sar B'Chayim as well as the Shochtim not slaughtering it properly. As well, perhaps maybe this goes back also, Rashi in Shabbos on Daf Pei Aleph Amid Beis, he brings an earlier minhag from the Gaonim, than the one they did it on Erev Rosh Hashanah, and also they did legumes, it wasn't like a chicken they did it with. He says on Erev Rosh Hashanah, they used to take a pot of vegetables or like legumes and wave it over the head 7 times and saying, this should be in exchange for our sins, and therefore then they used to throw the pot into the river. So number one is, it could be by having this minhag, this prevented the problem of animals. There's no sar b'chayim because it's vegetables. And as well, and therefore if you use the vegetable instead of the chickens, there's no sar b'chayim issue. And perhaps this could be as well the minhag today of most, I would say, of the practice of today of using money instead of chickens, because in order not to have too many chickens to slaughter, as well as the problem of Sar B'Chayim. And just to conclude, there's an interesting machokas among the Achronim, again, the Gra and the Ramah, that we know the halacha is that male, when he's doing kapara, should use a rooster, and a chicken, a female, should be used for kaparas of a female. So there's interesting discussion in the Achronim, what about a pregnant woman? And what about pregnant with twins? But a pregnant woman, the Ramah brings down that she should perform an additional set of kaparas because maybe she has a male. The implication of the Ramah, that Bisman Hazeh, this is before his time, but today with sonograms, maybe if you know it's a female, if it's a girl coming out, so you wouldn't have to. But and the Magen Avraham quotes from the Arizal that no, if you're pregnant, no matter what, you have to go ahead and bring another set of kaparas. So the Achronim point out, perhaps the issue is the famous issue the Gemara has in Yevamos, Ayin Chasam and Aleph, whether Uber Yerech Imo or not, whether the fetus has the status as the mother. So you have to do, according to this, even if you say the fetus has the status of the mother, but if it's a male, so it's a separate thing, and therefore you'd have to bring a separate one for the meal. But if, Uber Lav Yerachimo, so then it wouldn't, so that the Uber is not part of it, so therefore you'd have to bring an additional set of kaparas, all the time. And, now this is a much broader issue surrounding all the practical questions today of surrogate motherhood, the issues of abortion. That's a separate year. So to conclude, we discussed the minhag of kaparas and Erev Yom Kippur. Even originally had a lot of controversy. Darki Amori, the Ramah doesn't seem to have a problem with it, either because only those mentioned specifically in the Tosefta. Here, it has practical benefit because it's eliciting tshuva, and that's why perhaps it touches on the general machokas, the Gra and the Ramah, whether chukas agayim apply or not. And then the practical concerns about kaparas, about sar b'chayim, as well as not slaughtering the animal properly. The old minhag Rashi quotes out of Rosh Hashanah of doing a pot of legumes and you throw in the river. So today, maybe the modern day equivalent today, we do it with money, so we don't have that issue. And the issue of the pregnant woman, whether she's having a male or female, the question whether she has to bring another set of kaparas or not. So the Ramah quotes the practice that a pregnant woman should, because she might be having a male. Ki ha-mitzvah hazos, the Torah we read a couple of weeks ago, it told us that this mitzvah, it's not so far away, you don't have to go up into heaven to get it. Ki karov adav amiod, beficha uvav chalasoso. It's right next to us, and we have our mouth and our hearts to do. So there's a major machokas among the Rishonim, and the Gemara talks about it in Erev, and what mitzvah are we talking about? So one opinion, and it seems to be the Pashtus HaGemara, and Rashi's opinion, that we're talking about the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. That the mitzvah of Torah, that we know we don't listen to Mashkichim Labatsko, you have to put the effort in here, and that's what the Torah Shabbat Peh is all about. And therefore, that's the mitzvah. The mitzvah of Torah was given to us. It's for everybody. You could be the Vilna Gaon, and you could be in first grade, 10th grade, any grade you are, any IQ, and that's why Torah is called the Shira. This like anyone could sing, albeit not all the same. So to learning is not the same, but everyone has the ability to learn. That's why the Malach, the Gemara in Nida, that everyone, the Malach teaches everyone Kol Torah Kulo, and then gives you a little patch before and you forget it all. So the Chash says, so why bother teaching me everything if we're going to forget it? The answer is no, because every Yid becomes a Chefzis Shel Torah. In fact, that's the Rav Soloveitchik's explanation regarding a Tashmishe Kedusha, why the Chiyuv Kfura. So he says, why Alpidin we're not Chayav to bury Gayim, because it's not mitzvahs. The fact that we have 613 mitzvahs, they have 7, that's not the issue. Is you have to be a Tashmishi, you have to have a Gufa Kedusha. And therefore, every person is taught Torah before, and so they become kind of like a Chefzis Shel Kedusha. But either way, that's what he points out. So every person has the ability to learn. They can't say, well, Torah is not for me. That's the famous joke they say the belt says over, that this is true, that everyone was taught the Torah before. So we all know the famous Medrash by Yaakov and Esav, by Yisrotzu Habanim V'Kirba. When they went by a house of Avodah Zarah, Esav tried to get out, and went by a yeshiva, Yaakov tried to get out. What's Yaakov running to? He has the Malach Hashem, the best Rabbi in the world, giving him Shia. Where's he running to? So the Vel says, with a chavrusa like Esav, you want out of there. We see sometimes the chavrusa is just as important, if not more important, than the Shia. But either way, so that's what we learn out. The one opinion is it's the mitzvah of Torah. And therefore, same thing as we'll see by Torah, as we'll see by Tshuva, every little bit counts, whether the Gedolim are very big on it, 2 minutes here, 5 minutes here, 1 Mishnah here, and it's a lot of time spent, don't know, it's only 5 minutes before the game, or 5 minutes before, what's the point? Every minute counts. It's not far away. You can even do it in little chunks. You don't have to listen to a 6-hour share at one time. You could do it over, whatever time period it is. So one opinion is it's the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. But the famous Ramban, it's referring to the mitzvah of tshuva. And the tshuva also isn't one of the biggest obstacles in tshuva is people think, well, it's too hard, it's too difficult, it's not for me, and therefore the Torah is telling us you don't have to you don't have to take a trip to Italy, to Europe, to anywhere. It's right in front of us, and it's interesting. We'll get into is it says Kikara V'Dava Mi'od B'Fichu V'Vavcha La'asoso. So we have something similar. We say in Kriya Shema V'Chol V'Vavcha V'Chol Nafshecha V'Chol Modecha. But the Achronim point out it's the reverse order. Over here in Kriya Shema we say B'Chol V'Vavcha with your heart, B'Chol Nafshecha with your nefesh, and Ma'od with your money. So over here in Parashas Nitzavim it's the opposite. Kikara V'Dava Mi'od. Ma'od is with money, and Ma'od and that's the Targum writes over there that's what is well nefesh means, and nefesh chaya, Targum explains Adam as someone who talks. So Malala, right. And right, so therefore they point out, so we'll get back to why is it a reversed order here. If it seems to be the same 3 things, but it seems to be out of order. So that's the mitzvah according to the Ramban. The Rambam is a whole discussion in the Rambam whether he counts tshuva as a mitzvah or not, because it's the famous Minchas Chinuch who has a big chiddush, or he says from the lesson of the Rambam that the Rambam seems to say if or when you decide to do tshuva, this is the way you have to do it. It's directions, like there's a discussion among different mitzvahs. We have different categories of mitzvahs. So there's a mitzvah of a get. Does that mean everyone has to go out, get married, and get divorced? No, because not all mitzvahs are mitzvahs chiyuvis. I'm just being descriptive. I'm not recommending or discouraging whatever is necessary. But But of course, the halacha is no. There's no mitzvah of getting a get. Meaning, if it doesn't work out, you're having shalom bayis issues, and you've tried everything else, and you have to get it. You're going to separate. So the Torah gives me the way of doing it. So it's a mitzvah of tshuva that if I decide to do tshuva, okay, this is what I have to do. Or do I say like the Ramban? It's a mitzvah chiyuvis. So that's how the Minchas Chinuch, even though the Rav said it's very difficult to say that's the pshat in the Rambam. He quotes in the beginning of the Rambam. If you look at their whole Hilchas Tshuva, the Rambam writes in many places he seems to be mashma that there's a chiyuv of tshuva as well. But that's the Minchas Chinuch. According to the Minchas Chinuch in the Rambam, one can discuss whether tshuva is a chiyuv or not. We'll see my nafkamina, whether it's a chiyuv or not. So one nafkamina is are you just a fool or you're also an avaryan? In other words, if I don't do tshuva, am I doing something wrong? Or do I say, besides that, there's a mitzvah of tshuva? In fact, it's an interesting Meshech Chachma, because it's a famous kasha they asked. The Rambam's really paraphrasing the Gemara. We talk about it when we make our greeting. That talks about the Gemara that tzaddikim get rid of l'yalter l'chayim right away. Risham l'misa right away. And then Beinani Tolava owned it until Yom Kippur. And therefore, and then the Rambam Meyazadi, Masa tshuva, if you do tshuva, you'll be good. If not, you're in trouble. So the kshayla the Achronim ask on the Rambam is, why dafka tshuva? Like we know, we have the picture of a scale, and we know mitzvahs, averis. So why does the Rambam write tshuva? Why not just say chaparayin, do as many mitzvahs as possible during this time period, and therefore you'll go ahead, you'll tilt the why dafka tshuva. So many different answers in the Achronim. The famous answer from the Meshech Chachma and others, Rabbi Yonah has something similar in Shari Tshuva, that not all mitzvahs are equal. In other words, that tshuva is a responsibility. See, if you hold like the Rambam and the Minchas Chinuch, then you can't say this pshat. But according to the others, Rav Soloveitchik, that tshuva is a mitzvah. So once tshuva is a mitzvah, it becomes a major responsibility. Because you saw there was no mitzvah of tshuva. Okay, so you're involved in a certain avera, whether it took 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour. But that's it, it's over with. Like what can I do? It's over, I can't do anything about it. But the fact that we have the mitzvah of tshuva, so therefore every minute we don't reconcile, we don't do a tshuva on that avera, that compounds the avera, it's even worse. So by having the mitzvah of tshuva and not doing it, that's why they point out Dirshu Hashem Matsu. If there's a mitzvah of tshuva all year round, what's so special about Aseret Shemei Tshuva? So that's what Achronim point out, that because all year round, basically, if I want to do tshuva, then I could go ahead and do it. But here, God's coming down to me. If I don't do tshuva, that itself is going to be like the story. Yisrael Salanta writes by the Gemara in Yuma with the butcher, that one of the rabbis got insulted by a butcher. Not picking on butchers, it could be anybody. But and he was going to, and it was the whole year he was waiting. Of course, the person's going to come and ask for mechila. So he said, okay, he probably forgot it. Let me go. If I go and order some ribs, I think he'll remember me. So on his way over, he meets another rabbi in the street, and he says, "Oh, what are you doing?" I guess they usually discuss why you're heading to the butcher shop. And he says, "You know what? I'm going in because this person didn't do tshuva, and I want to give him an opportunity." He says, "Don't go. You're going to make it worse for the guy." So of course the guy goes in. The story, he sees him, and I think the bone pops up, and the butcher dies. So we see from here to why dafka now, because all year, because if the Rav didn't come to him, so okay, so it wouldn't be so bad. But God's coming down begging us to do tshuva, we don't do it. So that's what the Meshech Chachma has a nice pshat. In Re'eh it says, the Sadhagam is a bracha v'sakola. And then last week or 2 weeks ago we read about in the Tochacha or after that it's a chayim, it's a maves, it's a rab. So it's a much stronger lashon. So the Meshech Chachma says, because I guess he's taking it literally, that dafka where in the Torah says the mitzvah this tshuva was given. That it was given because he says beforehand we didn't have tshuva, so the stakes weren't so high, bracha or kola. But now that we have tshuva, we don't do it, then it's a chayim or mavis. So that's what the Meshech Chachma, or Rabbi Yonah had something similar, that dafka the Rambam is writing tshuva, because tshuva, tshuva is a much greater thing. Mitzvahs by itself won't help, but you have to do tshuva. That's what some say. The Amic Bracha and other Achronim as well, everything Rabbi Aaron Kotler, Rabbi Yisrael Salante all say the following, that they say no, because why dafka tshuva? Because let's say I give a lot of tzedakah now, I put on tefillin, I'm learning, it's great. But what year are we in now? 57, 73. Everything I'm doing now on in is for next year's cheshbon. It's great, and I'm going to get rewarded, but that would be for next year. Tshuva, as we'll see, or we'll discuss, has the ability to uproot even last year's, and therefore that's why it's dafka tshuva, because tshuva has the ability to go ahead and go ahead and uproot different averos. And others point out similarly, but a little different. The shaila is, if every year we say the tzaddikim are rin up l'chaim and risham l'mavis, then there's a objective problem going on, unless we have no idea who a Rosh and the tzaddik is. Maybe we don't, but it's hard to say. Eventually a tzaddik is going to die. So what does it mean? A tzaddik is rin up l'chaim. We know every year tzaddikim die. Some we know about, some we don't. And we see many wicked people walking around. So what does that mean? So the Achronim point out that it means it's a whole discussion in Tosas how they learn the Gemara, but it means you're a tzaddik in din or a rush of it. And it's not that overall. We don't know the cheshbon, but God's going to pick certain mitzvahs this year, and He's going to say a rush. Okay, He did 1,000 things wrong this year, but He did 3 good things. God's going to focus on these 3 things, and He's going to write you up. This year you're not going to live. A tzaddik, you might have done 1,000 good things, but with the one bad thing, or he could be written up. So they point out that, but tshuva is the only one that by doing tshuva you could is the only sure thing. If you make the Aveira side empty with the tshuva gemura, then you don't have to worry which one God is to pick. So whichever pshat in the Rambam. And we see that there's a special inyan of tshuva, besides the mitzvah all year round of tshuva. There's a special mitzvah during Aseret Samei tshuva to perform tshuva. And of course the famous kasha, the Mefarshim asked, if tshuva is a mitzvah, so how come we don't make a bracha? Where's the bracha on the mitzvah of tshuva? So there are many answers to it. Some Achronim point out, the Beis Yitzchak and others, that like based on the Gemara in Megillah, we find the Gemara talks about Eimaf Sikim Makolas, that when we read Parashas Kisava and Bekukosa, even though on Shabbos the minig is to have Hosafis, it's a Mishnah, even though the minig HaYeshivas and the Gra is against it, but they say it's different now because we make brachas today. Every person is called up. Back in the day, only one person, so you weren't calling up more people and making more brachas. So today they hold it's more of an issue, not Meikar Adin, but the minig of Yeshiv is not. Our minig is we make Hosafis. So therefore you shouldn't, during the parish of the Tochacha, you shouldn't make, even though the Gemara limits it to Parashas Bechukosai. That's directly from Moshe Rabbeinu, and Devarim is different. Nevertheless, the minig is that we don't make Eimaf Sikim Bakolas in both Kisavo as well as Bechukosai, and we start before and after. So why not? So one reason the Gemara gives is we don't want to put God on the pause button in the middle of giving rebuke. Well, God, I got to do something now. I'll come back and hear the mussar when I'm ready. That's inappropriate. However, Rosh Hashanah writes because you don't want to be mevarchen ala prunios. You don't want to make an extra bracha on a davara, on a prunios, even though on a certain level maybe prunios are good, ultimately, but the way we see things is it's still a prunios. It's a punishment, it's an onesh, and therefore we don't want to make a bracha. So if you make a hefsek, you have to add on. That's the whole discussion. That's bishchomen now. What about the original minig of when only the Kohen made the first bracha, and whoever got the last bracha made it? So that's a discussion among the Achronim. What was the rule when we made the change that every person makes a new bracha? Was that just a local technical change in Hilchas brachas, or was it a fundamental change in Hilchas Kriyas Hadar? In other words, what I mean is, how did it work? Let's say I walked in at Shlishi back in the good old days when there was, or specifically Levi. Let's say since I'm a Levi, I missed Kohen's bracha. I walked in, they called me up for Levi. Does that mean okay? So I just went ahead, or since I missed the person's bracha, then now I have to make a bracha? That's a discussion in the Achronim. How far was that principle? So some say it's a technical hilchos brachas. If you missed it, so therefore it wasn't that much of a change. And the other opinion says no, it was on the unit. There was one bracha on the Parsha Shavua that week, and no matter what, even if you didn't have Kavanah, you didn't hear it, didn't make a difference. There was a Chovas at Tzibur, and it doesn't make a difference. However, so the Achronim point out, but everyone agrees, and that's what we don't realize, Takanas Ezra was a different Takana. Because we're always used to reading Kisavo every year at this time. It falls out that way. But originally they read Kisavo. They read it could have been, it was only once every 3 years. So even if they weren't the other, they took out a Sefer Torah and they read from the Tochacha. So everyone agrees if it's a separate Mechayev, whether it was the 4 Parshios, Shkolim, etc. So then, even then, they did make their own bracha. So therefore, the Gemara says we don't make a bracha on a Prunia. So too, tshuva. Tshuva usually is associated with an aveira, or at least minimally you didn't fulfill your potential. You could do more even if it wasn't actually a ma'isa aveira, and therefore it's associated with a davara. So Chazal didn't want to institute an aveira like v'heshev es agzela. There's a mitzvah min Torah to return a stolen object, but we don't want to make a bracha on something which is associated with an aveira, like the Rambam in Hilchos Shofar, the issue of mitzvah bab aveira. So the Rambam Paskins, nevertheless, even though a shofar agazel you can be yote because you can't steal sound, nevertheless you don't make a bracha on something which is associated with, right? So therefore, so too here. Let us say a totally different reason.
So you wouldn't make a bracha, carbon chatos or something? There's no bracha.
Right. That's in general, it's a good question. What would you, what bracha did they make on the karbanos pashas? They made a bracha. But right, then perhaps but not unless you hold it, unless you could argue, many of the kabaris have to do with sins, and maybe Chazal didn't institute a bracha, and then maybe a little plug, or you could say, each depending on which karban you brought, then maybe you would make a bracha. I saw a discussion on it in terms of whether you actually made brachas on the karbanis, but it could tie into this issue. Another say totally different reason, nothing to do with that. It's because there's as the Rabbi always explains, there's the Ma'isa mitzvah and there's the Kiyam, like we explained last week. Yom Shua is the Ma'isa mitzvah blowing the shofar, but Zikaron Shua is internalizing the message. Like Simcha, the Ikar of Simcha, we might need the bus of a Yayin, but that's just the Nihug. The actual Simcha is feeling it inside. And conversely, Avelis is belay. We do Nehigui Avelis to create a mood. So therefore, since the mitzvah of tshuva is b'yisoda b'leiv, we don't make a bracha on something which isn't a ma'isa mitzvah. The ikar is the leiv, like the famous Beis Yosef by Bedikas Chametz. Why do we make the bracha on the mitzvah midrabanan of Bedika, and why not on Bittul Chametz? That's the mitzvah min Torah. So since the Gemara tells us Bittul b'leiv sagi, so since ultimately you can fulfill the mitzvah b'machshavitz b'leiv, so therefore Chazal never instituted a bracha on something which is still the b'leiv. And therefore we don't make a bracha on tshuva because the essence of tshuva is in our heart, and all those vidois, all those things we're doing are means to an end to try to get, there might be a ma'isa mitzvah, but the ultimate goal is to have the feeling inside. So either way, we don't make a bracha, whether because on the negative side it's associated with an aveira, no, nothing to do with that. In fact, since it's the highest level, it's feeling it, believe. In fact, that's what we said, b'chol avavcha, or b'chol dafsha, b'chol modecha. So really the highest level is believe. And then b'chol avavcha, nafshecha, and then speaking it out, and then modecha, giving, it's easiest to give money. As in Nitzavim it has it, it first tells you with the money, and then, at least talk about it, and then getting it to the heart. So why is it out of order? So that's what the Achronim point out, because we're talking about two different stages of tshuva. The Parashat Nitzavim is talking to someone who's not yet there yet, someone we want to become about tshuva. So you want to become about tshuva, you start with the easy stuff first. No matter how hard it is to give tzedakah, but it's a lot easier than doing tshuva. You take out, write out a check, you give some money, so you start off with easy, then you move to dibur, and then ultimately the goal is you're real about tshuva, you feel it in the heart. Then Shema, we're talking about already someone who's a tzaddik already, someone who's already there, and therefore it's already in the heart. And in fact, that's what they point out. Part of the mitzvah zos that tshuva, it's the process, and that's what they point out in terms of the famous, there's a Chazal which talks about It's in it says Kol Masha. This famous story with Achiar that Rav Meir was following his Rebbe Achiar, and he was even when he was already no longer in the fold, so to speak, he was still learning Torah from him. And then it was Shabbos, and he said to Rav Meir, "You have to stop here. It's Tchum Shabbos." So he said, "What about you? Why don't you come back?" He said, "What do you want from me?" Shuvu Banim. I heard from the Baskol that it's a way Rav Soloveitchik learns the Medrash, and way the Rizal or the Shlomo learns it, that the way the Shlomo learns it, that when he quotes the Medrash Shuva Banim, that he said, and the Baskol said V'lo Achiar, and not you. The Rav learns it, no, Shuva Banim, Ben, because Ben V'lo Achiar, that's just the drasha you make automatically. It wasn't that they actually mentioned Achiar by name. But either way, so he said Shuva Banim, so he says, no, so even you, so anyone, and that was the issue, everyone could come back, even in Achiar. And that's what they say on the Gemara about being in Baba Kama, when you're being makdish something, so it has to be yours and it has to be Bereshusho. That's why they talk about Yeyush, that someone never give up hope, because why? Even if it's not, as long as you don't have Yeyush, so God can't take it either. So therefore, in terms of tshuva, the same way. That's what they say on the Pshat, the Gemara, I think, in Psachim, Kol Masha Omer Balabayis Aseh, everything the Balabayis, Chutz Mitzeh. So the simple Pshat we're talking about, Hachnasus Archem, you listen to the Balabas when he offers you, but when he tells you to get lost, you stay there. So they say, Derek Drush, they point out, no, that's not the Pshat. We're talking about tshuva here. Kol Masha Omer Balabayis Aseh, Chutz Mitzeh, that you don't listen to him. But every Jew's barely a ben, even you, Acher. That's what Rameir was trying to get his Rebbe Acher to come back. So they point out that that was, and that depends on the level of what type of tshuva, because that's the famous Mesilas Yesharim. Mesilas Yesharim writes, what type of mitzvah is tshuva? Is it something that works me'ikar adin? Is it a chesed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? This is a famous Mesilas Yesharim, everyone quotes, Rav Ochan and others in Perek Daled, that the Mesilas Yesharim writes that tshuva is a chesed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it doesn't make sense logically. Because how could a makshava be okir amaisa? In other words, if you break someone's window and you say sorry, it might be nice, you should say sorry, but he wants compensation to pay for the window also. Tshuva, you should have to fix the window and bring it back, put a new window, and at least fix the old window. So how could it be? The fact that a makshava could be okir amaisa, that's the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He gives us the mitzvah of tshuva. So comes along Rabbi Chanan and says, he asked this question to the Chafetz Chaim, his Rabbi. He said, what are you talking about? What is the Mesilas Yesharim talking? It's against the Gemara in Kiddushin. The Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Mem, has the famous Gemara about someone could be a tzaddik kol yamav, and then he has charat at the end, he loses all his zechuyos. So Rabbi Chanan says, it's not a chesed, because we see it works two ways. If you're telling me only a ma'isa avera, a makshava tova could erase a ma'isa avera, then you're right. But we see from the Gemara in Kiddushin, you can have all these ma'asim tovim your whole life, but you can have a makshava to regret everything. So we see it works mikra adin. So what is the Mesilas Yesharim talking about? That it's a tshuva, it's a chesed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he was fortunate to have the Chafetz Chaim as his Rabbi. So he asked the Chafetz, not that he didn't have his own teretz, as we'll see, but he asked the Chafetz Chaim, so what's pshat? So he says, I'll tell you pshat. So the Chafetz Chaim says, there's the famous Gemara in Yuma, the different types of tshuva. Because the Gemara quotes the psukim from Reish Lakish. On one hand, tshuva makes them into shkagagos. It turns Yemezid, it levels the playing field. On the other hand, we see it's nasa kesachuyas. It turns them into mitzvahs. So which one is it? So the Gemara says, Go kasha. Kami tshuva miyava. One's tshuva miyira, one's tshuva miyavo. Tshuva miyira levels the playing field. But tshuva miyava, that even turns into zechuya. So he says, the chesed of HaKadosh, the chesed that the Mesilas Yesharim is talking about, that's the tshuva miyava, that the averis can even turn into mitzvahs. But the tshuva miyira, leveling the playing field, that's the Gemara in Kiddushin. That's how the Chafetz Chaim answered. So Rabbi Chanan didn't like it. He said, but I think we could say a different shot based on another Rav Chaim, not in his other sefer, where he writes as follows. He says something else. He says, no, maybe we could say a different shot, that every maisa, whether it's a maisa mitzvah, a maisa avera, to be split into two categories. It's the maisa itself, and then there's the totzah, the effect you have on it. So in other words, you're involved in acts of chesed, so whether you like it or not, it has an impact on your neshama, on your personality, and you become an isha chesed. You're a different person, and you're a rotzeach. I'm assuming not b'l'shem mitzvah, but that's a whole discussion. Even rotzeach l'shem mitzvah, does it have an impact on you? That's the famous as well. Even the Meshach Chachma, others by Pinchas. That even though Pinchas, what do you mean he was rewarded brisi shalom? He was a Kohen anyway. So what kind of joke is that? So one answer, he wasn't a Kohen, but according to the other pshat that he was a Kohen. So the pshat is that no, since you did a Maisa Ritzicha, even though you did it with Shem Mitzvah, but that's the if not for the special Brisi Kunas Olam, it would have an impact on you, and therefore we need you to give the special bris. That's why the Orach Chaim HaKadosh writes by the Eran Nidachas. But not the Rav Chaim Shmulevitz used to say it over every year. Nasam L'cha Lo Rachamim, that on people who have to destroy the Eran Nidachas, so God's going to have mercy. Why does God have to have mercy? Because you're involved in a Ma'aser Ritzicha, and that's the famous statement from Golda Meir, everyone likes quoting, that I can forgive the Arabs for killing some Jews, which, we could discuss whether you can or not, but the second part I want to focus on, but the fact that would cause Jewish boys to go in the army and killing, the impact on them, now we can't forgive you on. That's the sisod here of Rav Chaim Luzzatto, that there's two parts. There's the actual Maisa, the act, and in other words, there's klape shamayim and there's klape atzmo. There's God says you'll get reward and punished for a certain aveira or a mitzvah. There's a second aspect that has an impact on you. So Rav Chanan says, I want to say pshat like this: that really what the Gemara in Kedushin, which is working Meikar Adin, so that's the mitzvah of tshuva, that a machshava could turn away a ma'isa. That turns it into, it could klape shamayim, that you're not going to get punished. In other words, if you did an aveira and you did a tshuva, whether it's a tshuva meir or a certain tshuva, you're not going to get punished for it. So that's the Gemara in, and that's a machshava can be. And in the same way, if you have charata over, if you have charata on what you did, you have the ability to lose the schar perhaps for a mitzvah. That's a machshava can be oker. But he's saying, but in terms of the tshuva miyava that the Mesilas Yesharim is talking about, that's the second, that's the totzah. That besides klape shamayim, God will take care of that. But klape atzmo, that it's true you might have did tshuva, but the impact of ritzicha, of lashon hara, or any other averos you did, it made you a different person. The greatness of tshuva meyava, or the greatness of the tshuva, we'll see for Klal Yisrael, is that you have the ability to even it has no impact. That's the Rav's pshat. And we'll find throughout the Yom Kippur davening, the Yom Kippur is the day of kapara and the day of tahara. So I guess in the article, they write kapara atonement, tahara purification. What does that mean? So the Rabbi explained there's a big difference between kapara and tahara. Kapara means you get forgiven for your sins. In fact, I think that's what the Rav said. There's a minhag of not the Rav didn't say it, but there is a minhag of going to the mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur. We know there's a minhag, some go to the mikvah every day. Then some have a minhag, some Erev Shabbos, some have all on the Shalosh Regalim, but the one brought down in Shulchan Aruch is at least Erev Yom Kippur, and the minhag many extended to Erev Rosh Hashanah as well. So, and that's the whole discussion on why, so those who go all the time, we understand, why do we go, why the minhag, what's it based on, what's it based on? So some want to say that it's a whole question. Really, originally, before Takanas Ezra, before they repealed Takanas Ezra, not only couldn't you daven, you couldn't learn either. So when they repealed it, the question was exactly how much of it did they repeal? So we assume a Yikar Adin, it's a Machlokas Rishon and Rambam and Ravid. We assume a Yikar Adin that only for or at that point it was only on davening, and then and that was it. And we don't assume it today at all. And others assume that no, it was both. It was on on davening and learning. So therefore, some it's a machlokas rishon, and the maker that we assume you don't need we don't have to go to the mikveh at all. We could learn and we could daven. But some were machmir because of those Rishonim that say that no, that maybe he only repealed it for Talmud Torah, that everyone's in agreement, but for learning, but for davening, perhaps Bizman Hazeh, you still have to go to the mikveh. That's the minhag of the Hasidim. So we don't assume that way, but as we do many chumras during the Asar Shemei Tshuva, so therefore we're being machmir for Takanas Ezra on an Erev Yom Kippur, an Erev Rosh Hashanah some learn. And to point out, people don't know that the Rambam was a quasi chassid, because apparently the Rambam Shita was, you had to go to the mikveh every time. He used to go to the mikveh before davening all the time. So either way, that's how somewhere. It doesn't say it has nothing to do with Takanas Ezra at all. The halacha had to do with the halacha of Chayiv Adam L'tar Atzmo V'Regel. There was a mitzvah to go to your Rebbe on the Regel, and you had to go to the mikveh and because you need a higher level purification on Yontiv, and therefore, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it's a day of Simcha as well. That's a discussion, not a day of Simcha Yisera, and therefore we have to be L'fnei Hashem Okechem, and therefore it's another aspect of the mikvah. There's a discussion, the Ramah brings it down, and in fact there was some shittas that made a bracha. We don't make a bracha, but there was some who, according to Rabbi Yonah, it seems to be was a real din daraisa. And he made a bracha before, and we go to the mikvah, we don't make a bracha. So Rav Salvation just pointed out, one should be careful when they go to the mikvah, even though most mikvahs say it's usually it's really a woman's mikvah, we just use it during the day. So if you do that, it's not an issue. But it's a whole discussion. So for Takanas Ezra, you don't really need a full din of a mikvah like a woman's mikvah. In fact, maybe if you take a shower and enough water, there's special other. I guess they exist. There's some men mikvahs and this and that. So he said you have to be very careful. You go to a real mikvah. Why? Because he says, because even though it works for Takanas Ezra, but Ezra didn't say you weren't about Keri anymore. You're still about Keri, but we repealed it. We'll let you learn in Daven now, but you still have your Tumah with you. That you have to go to a real mikveh to get the Tahara. So that's what the Rav explained, the difference between Kapara and Tahara. So Kapara kind of is like the Rav Chanan saying, that's Klape Shama, you get forgiven for your sins. But doesn't mean your essence, you still had all those sins on you. So the greatness of Yom Kippur is it's not only a day of Kapara, but the day of Tahara, and that's how Rabbi Chanan explained. He said that's because we see Chazal tell us that based on the Medrash on Birkos Kohanim, that Shuv is only for the Jews. It's a special gift he gave for the Jews and not for the Goyim. In fact, because on the Medrash it says that Kol B'Olam are going to be judged. We believe even the Goyim are judged. But the Ramban writes, and the Ramban apparently when he had to leave Spain and to leave, he went to Eretz Yisrael, and he was lucky to get a minyan on like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur during those times, and apparently he gave a long drasha, like a 5-6 hour share in Yom Kippur. I never gave that. It reminds me in the days when I used to daven here, and then between Musaf and Mincha, I used to give a couple of hours share between Musaf and Mincha and Yom Kippur. But the Ramban wrote down his drasha, I assume after Yom Kippur or before, and basically he writes that it's really a day of judgment for everyone, but they don't have. But it's not really a day of Slicha Mechila for them. Slicha Mechila is on us, not on them. In fact, the kasha is, Rav Shlomo Kluger asked Rav Yonas and Eipshitz, if it's a day of, how come we don't tell them? How come they don't know about it? It's not fair. They're being judged, and so there are many answers, but one answer is because it shouldn't be a kitra, kind of like a ger. That it's a whole discussion because a ger embarrasses. That apparently, he said, because the government can do such a tshuva, it's going to make the Jews look bad, so we don't want to tell them that they can prepare. Yeah, so that's the Gemara, but the Rambam, but Yonas Aishit says it regarding why we don't reveal to the Goyim that now's the time for tshuva. But either way, so they point out, so yeah, we know it's not true because we all know from the Mafti Yonah, we read on Yom Kippur, that Ninveh did tshuva. So what do you mean? That's what the Rambam points out. No, of course it's tshuva. That's Klape Shamayim, Klape Onish, a guy can do tshuva. But the special Tahara is only for a Jew. Mikvah Yisrael is not only can you get a kapara for the sin, but also your whole essence is different. And in fact, that's why we do many minhagim throughout Elul and Aseret Shemei Tshuva. There's a beautiful Rabbeinu Yonah. We know that usually we have a minhag Yisrael. We have all year round that we keep. The Ramah brings down. We put salt on the table, and basically because our our tables like a mizbeach, and that's why we learn different halachas. You really, just like you can't kill on a mizbeach, really you shouldn't kill. Really, you try not to kill bugs and ants on your table either. Different halachas that don't met to a mizbeach, and there's a whole discussion in Tosas and brachas. What about bisman hazeh? What do we need salt for? We have pas nikia. We have good tasting bread. Well, my blood pressure is high enough. What do I need more salt for it? So Tosas and echanami bisman hazeh, you don't really need salt. Pas nikia, and our bread has salt in it. It tastes good. However, he quotes Rabbeinu Menachem, who says that no, even though bisman hazeh, that we don't need salt on our bread, it tastes good without it, because it has plenty of salt on it without it. So he says, because you know why on the medrash that the malach is makatreg, that basically when you go wash your hands and everyone can talk, there's can't even have a chance to do mitzvahs, so the Satan's waiting to be makatreg, but you look at the salt on the table, and he'll remember the karbanos. On every carbon you have to have salt, and b'schus ha-karbanos it will save us. So therefore, even though bisman hazeh we don't need the salt, for taste purposes, there's another reason to dipping it in or not. That's al pi kabbalah. The real thing is having it on your table. But our meaning is we dip it in as well. That's just more kabbalah. So you need and the Magen Avraham says we pass like Rabbi Menachem. And our meaning is that we, even though bisman hazeh we have too much salt in the chal, we put salt and we put more salt on it as well. So that's the minhag Yisrael all year round. And maybe Leil Pesach, there are other nights where it's a whole discussion though. Should we put salt on the matzah Leil Pesach? Because it's lechamoni. So therefore some achronim say you shouldn't put salt on it because you want it to be just the matzah. And others don't like it. The stipe or others say, what do you mean? We just started Daf Yomi again. We, by being Klai, so not necessarily me. But we started Daf Yomi, and the Daf Beis Amud Beis talks about when's the Sos Zman, when's the Zman for Kriyas Shema. So when the ani eats, what is it? Pas b'melach. In other words, I know we say in Pirkei Avos, what's the dark of an ani? So what do you mean? So therefore they say they do. That's the different minhagim whether you put salt on the matzah. If any, that's when you. But that's when you'll need it more, the salt. You'll need it more in the matzah than on the challah. But that's a discussion different minhagim. So we know comes the Ramah on Leil Rosh Hashanah. We're all familiar with the minhag of apple and honey, but the Ramah brings down the minhag that one should have honey on the table, and to say Yehi Ratzon, that we should have a nice sweet New Year. So the shaila is, what about salt? Is that including salt instead of salt? So the Kaf HaChaim, right? No. In addition, we still have the salt there, but in addition to the salt, you also have the honey. And others, the Steipler, the Chazon Ish, other Achronim say the minhag Yisrael is not to have salt, at least not putting salt on, whether it should have on the table or not. But people don't use salt. You shouldn't use salt. They recommend not using salt. Do not only, in fact, the minhag isn't just on Rosh Hashanah, but on Amiel Erev Yom Kippur, Motzi Yom Kippur, throughout Sukkot, they say you should stay away from the salt. So what's the pshat in the minhag? According to this minhag, that we focus. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? Put salt on. Okay, so with salt and honey, it's like you balance the playing field a little bit. So why are you so against salt? So some say it's based on the following. There's a kasha, a more fundamental question, which is a separate here in its own right. How can we eat honey? Because we all know not only can't we bee honey, not only can't we eat bees, but ayotzi mina asar asar. It's something which comes out from a forbidden. It's a further machlokas Tosas in the Rambam, whether it's a isur chadash. It's the same. It's the same isur as the bee. That's the machlokas you show him there. The Shach discusses it over there. But everyone agrees hayotzi mina asar. How can we have bees? So the Gemara quotes the pasuk Eretz Zavas Lavu Dvash. If the Torah praises the Eretz Yisrael with milk and honey, so therefore, of course, it has to be kosher. But of course, the kasha is, but that's talking about Dvash Tamarim. So, but the Gemara nevertheless, it's a difficult Gemara, but the Gemara concludes that it's talking about bee honey. It's not clear why, but the bottom line of the Gemara is it's talking about bee honey, and that's why we do eat bee honey. So Tosas asks over there, it's okay, forget about yotzim and asar. We know honey is very sticky, so what about the ragle, the legs, or whatever bees have, wings, bugs, hands, whatever they have, the ragle of the bees, they get stuck in the honey. How could you eat honey, Tosas asks? forget about Yotzi Min Asu, you're actually eating the actual bee. So Tos's answer is no, it's no kasha, because the ragle of the bees, they have this status of bones which have they don't have any taste. It's no sin tam lufkam, number one. And therefore they're like bones, and therefore it's like the gid hanasha, get the whole issue ain't begin to there is no taste. That's what Tosfos writes. Rabbeinu Yonah says no, it's a different pshat. The Rosh quotes Rabbeinu Yonah that no. Well, you know what the pshat is? That the Gemara tells us in Avodah Zarah, Chazal tell us that you're allowed to buy honey even from a guy. How could you buy honey from a guy? The Gemara says maybe put some nevela in it. So the Gemara says no, we don't have to worry. Even if the guy put nevela in, the koach of honey has the power to transform the meat. So therefore we're not concerned. So Rabbi Yonah says the same thing here. We're not worried about the ragli, even if the bee, there is the legs of the bees, but who cares? Once you go through the process of the honey is so great, it has the ability to transform, and it's no longer ragle and no longer vela. So that's the pshat that they point out here. That what does salt represent? As the Rav Shimshon Hirsch writes, on why do you need salt in every carbon? Salt is the ultimate preservative. Before before freezers and refrigerators, you had to put everything in salt. Salt doesn't have the ability, if something's spoiled, it's too late, you don't have to put salt on. But something's still good, whatever the shelf life of that food is, if you put salt on it, salt will preserve it. So it's the ultimate preservative. And we bring a carbon, we want to show God we are following the Mesorah, we are preserving the Mesorah. So that's all year round, that's the minhag of salt. But on Rosh Hashanah, we don't want to show God we're staying the same. The whole essence of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, whole Haser Shemei Tshuva, is God, what are you talking about? We're not like Zohar, we're like honey. We have the ability to change, and therefore we want to do tshuva, and the honey represents that. And that's what they point out. Rav Elyashiv has a nice explanation. He points out, it's a famous Gemara. It says, Kol Talmid Chacham. So first, before that, so there's another Gemara first. He brings down that, Chavetz Chaim brings down that it's Masik Davash, Torah is compared to Davash. That fits in well with the Rishonim who learn Ki HaMitzvah Zos. That's the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Yeah, then therefore they learn out. So the Chavetz Chaim writes that Torah has the same power as honey. That just like honey has the ability to transform, to take a piece of nevela, the ragli of the bees, and turn it into kosher, that's the koach of Torah. And that's what they all write, mitzvah does tshuva, and especially Torah Shabbat Peh they focus on. But Torah also has that ability. It could take someone and change them around. And Rav Elyashiv takes it a step further. Rav Elyashiv writes that even more than honey, because according to some achronim, the way you learn the Gemara there, is that's only if it's pieces in the vela. But if it's a beria, according to some Rishonim achronim, honey doesn't have the power. If it's a whole beria, then you can't eat the honey, it's still treif. But the koach of Torah is, can take someone whose the whole essence is in the vela. He's the terrible person, but Torah still has the ability to change the whole barrier, to change the person completely. And that's what Rav Elyashiv says. That's the pshat in the Gemara, famous Gemara. The Kol Talmid Chacham, She'ein Lo Deya, doesn't have any seichel, common sense, as Mark Twain always points out. Unfortunately, common sense ain't too common. But Kol Talmid Chacham, She'ein Lo Deya, Nevela Tova Himanu. A piece of nevela, carcass, is better than him. So simple pshat is, we know how much harm a Talmid Chacham has no seichel could do. Whether you publicize different things, you make different psakim, and we don't have to go. Unfortunately, we don't have to go too far today. But Kol Talmid Chacham Bodei Nevela Tova Himanu. So what's the pshat? No, it is the pshat. Because Kol Talmid Chacham, you have all this Torah in you, and you're the same person you were last year. You worse, you didn't change. You're a nobody. A nevela, you put in a piece of nevela into the honey. Nevela Tova Himano, that's the pshat, and that's the whole essence of tshuva. That's the whole. That's what the Rav points out by the whole machlokas in terms of Birkas Kohanim. How much tshuva do you need? But the whole essence of tshuva, the Rambam says the key to tshuva is ani achir, that you becoming someone else. And that's the whole essence of Haser Shemei Tshuva. That's the whole essence of tshuva itself, and that's the minhag Yisrael that you'll always find. Besides the obvious reason of honey, that we should have a sweet new year, but based on Rabbeinu Yonah, that the whole concept of honey represents the power to transform, and that's what Haser Shemei Tshuva, is all about. Oh yeah, just to again, maybe I'll get the name right this time. Is it Gala or Gala?
Gala.
Gala. Rachel Bas HaChaver Shol Chaim. We thank for sponsor, when the memory of the share was sponsored.